We have a stained glass window with a larger-than-life image of the astronaut John Glenn in his spacesuit. Like him, this morning, we will travel a great distance in a short time through 3 little sermons based on today's readings. The first sermon is called Hating Your Life. The world's Anglican bishops met at this summer's Lambeth Conference in England, and a group of bishops issued a press release condemning same-sex marriage. It demands, quote, repentance by the revisionist provinces, and goes on to state that we cannot all be in communion if we have 2 different opinions about marriage and sexuality. Now, we experience this kind of Christianity frequently here in North America. All of us encounter Christians who seem to have absolute confidence in knowing precisely who God is, and that they are doing exactly what God wants them to do. Often they seem to believe that God hates the people whose faith is different than their own. Now, let me point out that lacking this kind of confidence is not the same thing as lacking faith. In so many ways, God remains a mystery to us. The Gospels do not include simple instructions to follow beyond loving your neighbor as yourself. They do not mention abortion or homosexuality. Instead, they offer an approach to living, an intervention in our lives that confronts us with hard questions. Jesus in the Gospel of Luke says that his listeners need to calculate the costs of following him, the way a builder needs to understand the expensive materials needed to build a tower, or the way a king might need to figure out the number of warriors required to win a war. Jesus talks about hating your parents, your wife, your spouse, your children, even life itself. The preacher Barbara Brown Taylor says that if we came here today thinking that we were disciples of Jesus Christ, this reading clearly shows that we are not. We are more like friends of the disciples than actual disciples ourselves. Now, we may feel a sense of despair that we could never be capable of devotion like this, but at times we surprise ourselves. The truth is that Jesus really does change us. We do not always live simply for ourselves. On August 12th at the Chautauqua Institution, a man rushed onto the stage and began to stab the novelist Salman Rushdie. Many years ago, religious leaders in Iran encouraged their followers to kill Rushdie, and this assassin would have succeeded if it had not been for Rushdie's audience. Instead of running away, they leapt up from their seats and they saved the writer from being killed. When it comes to the choice between witnessing a terrible injustice or, in a sense, hating their own life, they chose to sacrifice themselves. Rushdie said that it is not just his right to speak that was damaged by this threat, but there are 138 million adult readers in the United States, and our right to read is also endangered by tyrants. We know that writers in Russia, Ukraine, China, Turkey, Afghanistan, and many other places are being tortured and killed. Their parents, spouses, children are being put at risk by their actions, and that they choose something higher than their own life. And sometimes we do too. My second sermon is called Where Reconciliation Happens. Kathy Stevens and I were talking about that reading from Philemon today. And I said to her, you know, Kathy, you're going to be the only person for the next 3 years who's going to read an entire book of the Bible to us. And that's what she did. That's it. The whole book of Philemon right there this morning. And in many ways, this may be The first time, when you read the Bible carefully over the years and you study it with a kind of intensity, one of the most remarkable things is that I keep discovering something new in it all the time. And this week, as I've been studying the book of Philemon, I've realized how much this book summarizes the entire theology of the Apostle Paul. Now, when people come to me seeking pastoral care, it's often because they have a question of faith or because some terrible thing has happened to them. But mostly, it has to do with the greatest challenge of our lives. That is, how can we be reconciled to the people in our life? Now, this week for homework, I want you to physically take a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, and I want you to write down the names of the people that you need to be reconciled to. People who are alive and people who are dead. And I want you to spend the rest of your week with that little piece of paper in your pocket or purse, and I want you to pray for those people. Now, you may be surprised by a sense of how impossible the task of making amends is. Now, you may be separated from people who you're supposed to love because of issues having to do with substance abuse or mental illness. You may just inhabit fundamentally different thought worlds, or you may have mutually exclusive political ideas. Onesimus is a slave who has run away from his owner Philemon and found refuge with Paul in the vast expanse of urban Rome. Now, every single social and cultural force seems to ensure that these two people can never be in a relationship of truth with each other. And yet, you get that, right? How could they ever be honest and truthful given the social circumstances they are in? And yet, Paul reaches out to both of them. On the one hand, he embraces Onesimus, the slave, and he calls him my child, my own heart. And on the other hand, he embraces Philemon, the slave owner, and says, you are my partner, my fellow worker. I have received much joy and encouragement from your love. Now, the very center of this whole thing is an idea that although Paul could command it, he says, I appeal to you on the basis of love. Imagine him holding the hand of each and bringing them together through the cross of Jesus. Imagine yourself brought together in such a way with the one who is estranged from you. Where does reconciliation happen? It starts within you, in the place where you honor the freedom which every person has. My final sermon is called, You Are God's Art. Now, the preacher Sam Wells talks about art as a combination of material, form, and ideas. So the material might be clay, the form might be a chalice, and the idea is a common cup which we share in communion. The point is that the artist does not make something out of nothing, but out of what already exists. And that art is spiritual. It realizes a kind of purpose. It strives for a kind of goal. It is shaped by invisible forces. So in a vision, God invites Jeremiah to watch a potter at work. You can imagine the potter at work with the wheel spinning and his hands on the vessel. And this is what Jeremiah writes, quote, the vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hand, and he reworked it into another vessel. Now, this is the very heart of what it means to be a Christian. The purpose of all this, the beautiful stained glass windows, your elegant clothing, the beautiful music that the men's choir is making. The point of all of this is so that you might be transformed. Wells says that Christianity is not about imagining a perfect world and straining to get back to that original goodness. Instead, God takes the actual material of our lives and realizes an idea. The idea behind all reality is that God will go to any length to restore our relationship to her. So St. Athanasius describes us as a kind of portrait obscured by sin that God is restoring carefully. St. Augustine writes that the resurrection is like God reshaping the clay that is us into a beautiful new form, a new statue. God starts with what we are already, with what we have been given, and with what has been done to us. We have been blessed by our creation, and we have been harmed by the world. Parts of ourselves that we may not even like may become transformed under God's fashioning hand. Through the imagination of God, we are becoming new. Now, prayer is such a dangerous thing. I mean, if it wasn't so important, I would discourage you from praying because you just don't know what's going to happen. You really don't. And so for the last 6 months, I've been praying Psalm number 19. I've memorized it every morning. I repeat it in my heart. And there's a line in there that just has been making me stumble every week. It says this: above all, keep your servant from presumptuous sins. Let them not get dominion over me. Then shall I be whole and sound. What a frightening thought. The idea that what is happening may be how God is making me more humble. In church together, we see the artist at work, not only in history, but in each other's lives. God's hand is on us, and our longing for a deeper goodness, a truer existence, the beauty that we were created for, is being realized. Now, for over 50 years, Kathy Stevens has been coming to church, but along with her, Everett Davis has been coming to church. He knew 5 deans personally. Everett Davis loved this place. He was so proud of being a member of our congregation. And although that many people knew him as a figure on the stock exchange, we know him for his outlandish outfits. I mean, who else has a beautiful furry vest with a matching furry hat? That was who Everett was, a beautiful person of style and art. And this week we celebrated his life at a funeral on Thursday. And in the funeral, they at the reception, they had a piano with about 50 hats and about 50 different bottles of cologne. And Gwen, his sister, asked each of us to take something home to remember Everett by. And so I took this hat, which Heidi's not very keen on, but this is what it looks like. Maybe you're not very keen on it either. But it reminds me of my friend. What we didn't know about Everett so much was that Everett was also a poet, and he wrote a kind of hymn. And I'm going to close the sermon with that poem that he wrote himself. The work I've done, it seems so small. Sometimes it seems like nothing at all. But when I stand before my God, I want to hear him say, "Well done." May the work I've done speak for me. May the work I've done speak for me. When I'm resting in the grave, there is nothing that can be said. May the work I've done speak for me. May the life I live speak for me. When the best I try to give, my mistakes he will forgive. May the life I live speak for me. May the service I give speak for me. When I've done the best I can and my friends don't understand, May the service that I give speak for me. In our best moments, we are living for something far greater than ourselves. We are where reconciliation happens. We are God's work of art.